Hi there. In today's video we are going to implement a basic socket communication between a Node.js server and an iOS client. Sockets can be used in many use cases, especially where multiple clients want real-time data such as chat applications or online multiplayer games. The basic idea is that each client can connect to a certain port on the server and listen for any changes. For example, if client A sends a message to the server could also notify its client B using a different port. This also allows clients to listen on certain ports for changes, and most of the times you have the server streaming data. Now for this we are going to use Socket.io. Socket.io enables real-time bidirectional and event-based communication. It works on every platform, and you can literally stream almost all kind of data such as image, audio, video, and we're mostly interested in just sending messages for now. And the application that we are going to build is going to look like the following. So here on the left I have a Node.js server running, and I also have an app on the client side. So as soon as I open this app, the client will send the Node.js server this message: "Hi Node.js," and as soon as the Node.js server gets this message, it will send its own message and it will say, "Hi iOS client." I know this is a very simple example, but you will understand how Socket.io works and you can easily modify it to use it in your own project. So without any further ado, let's get started. Alright, so the first thing we need to do is install Node.js, and the easiest way to do it is to use Homebrew. If you haven't installed it yet, go to this link right here. I will also put it into the description. And just copy and paste this line into your terminal, which will install Homebrew for you. And as soon as you have installed it, you can go into your terminal and simply type brew install npm, which stands for Node Package Manager. I already did that, so I will remove this. And once the installation is done, you can check if Node was really installed by saying node -- version. At the time of the recording, I'm running version 14.11, so we're ready to go. So the first thing I will do is create a directory called socket. So I will say make directory socket. I will also change directory into it, like so. And in here, all you have to do is type Node Package Manager, so npm, and then init. And this will initialize the project for us. So all we have to do is press enter till we get to the entry point, and when we get to the entry point we are going to rename this to server.js instead of the default naming. Press enter, keep continuing till you get to this point, and then simply type yes. Alright, now let's see what we got. Type ls to see what we have in the directory. So we have this package.json. So we're going to open this package.json with an editor. Now I'm going to use Visual Studio Code, but you can also use Sublime or any editor you like. So go ahead and type open dot. This will open the directory for us, and then simply drag this into the editor you like. Alright, so here I am in Visual Studio Code, and I opened this package.json from this folder. And in here we are going to make a few changes. So let me copy this scripts dictionary and paste it in here, but first add a comma right there, like so. And we will rename this to dependencies, like so, and then the dependencies we are going to want is socket.io, and in here we have to specify the version. We are fine with the latest version, so I will just add a star here. And we also need express, so let's type express in here, and it will also end like this. Alright, now go ahead and save this file. Go back to the terminal. Now go ahead and type npm install, and this should install the dependencies for us. Now as you have seen, it created a few more files for us. It created this logged package.json and the node modules, and this basically takes care of including the dependencies for us. Alright, great. Now let's go back to this editor, and we're going to create an additional file, and I will call it server.js. So in here, we are going to access dependencies we just included like so. So we will say variable express equals require, and we pass an express like so. And then we will say variable app equals express, and then variable server equals require HTTP, and we will call create server on it with our app that we just defined like so. Lastly, we need to access our socket.io, so we will say variable io equals require socket.io, and we will simply say listen to the server like so. Now let's also create an array to keep track of the number of connections. So we'll say connections is an array, initially empty, like so. Now we want the server to run on port 3000 on our local host. So we will say server.listen on either the port that it's already given, so which would be process.environment.port. Otherwise, just use the port 3000 like so. Now always remember to add these semicolons because we're programming in JavaScript and not in Swift. And let's also print something on the console so we know that the server is running. Server is running like so. Now we can start using socket.io. So we are going to say io.sockets on connection. Now the second parameter is going to be a function like so, which takes the socket. A little typo here, it should be function. All right. Now, whenever a connection happens, we want to add this socket into our array of connections. So we will say connections dot push socket, and then we want to console log how many connections we have. So we will simply say console log and then %s sockets are connected, and the %s is going to be our connections dot length like so. And similarly, when the disconnection happens, we also want to be notified, so we will say socket dot on disconnect. Here we also get a function with some data, and here we will simply remove that connection. We will say connections dot splice connections dot index, so at the index of the current socket, and then we are going to say 1, which basically defines the number of elements we want to remove. So we only want to remove that one socket. As always, don't forget the semicolons here as well. Now let's also log this. So we will just copy and paste this in here and rename this. We will simply say disconnect in front of here and connect in front of here. Now when the connection is done and the client, for example, would send a message to this Node.js server, we want to respond, and we have to first figure out where the client is going to communicate to us. So now to receive the messages from our iOS client, we have to be able to listen on a port and also send back a message. So now to listen to these changes, we're going to say socket.on. I will simply call this one Node.js server port. Now in the iOS client, we have to obviously send our message to this as well. Otherwise we wouldn't receive it here in the Node.js server. In here, we also get a function with some data. And this data is basically going to be contain the message that the iOS client will send to the server. So let's just log this out like so. And then as soon as we get this message, we want to send back a message to the client. And the way we are going to do that is by simply saying io.sockets.emit. And this port I simply call iOS client port. And I will pass something like a JSON. So we have a message. And the message is going to be hi iOS client. Also add a semicolon here. Alright, that's all the code we really need. Alright, now make sure you save this and go back to your terminal and type node server.js. As you can see, the server is running. So now let's get to the client, create a new project. It's going to be app for me because I'm running the latest beta version. It could be called single view app, doesn't really matter. Simply call this one socket app or whatever you like. Make sure the interface is set to SwiftUI and the language to Swift. Press next and save it somewhere you like. Now we don't really need this automatic preview here, so I will just close this. Make us some more space. Also, let's change the simulator to iPhone 11. Alright, so the first thing we need to do is install this framework called Socket.io Client Swift. Copying this GitHub link, like so. And then we will use the Swift Package Manager instead of CocoaPods because it's much easier. All you have to do is go to the Xcode top menu bar and go to File and then Swift Packages and select Add Package Dependency. And in here we are going to paste in this GitHub link, press next. We just continue by pressing next. Right now we just have to wait a bit. Now press finish. And as you can see, the dependencies are now part of our project and we can start using it. So in here, simply say import socket.io like so. And then we will create a class called final class service, which is going to be an observable object. In here, we will define the socket manager like so. And it will take a socket URL and a config. And the socket URL is going to be WS and then localhost at port 3000. And we are also going to pass some config parameters. So we can say that we want to log what's happening by simply saying log true. And we can also use compress. Oh yeah, and you can't just pass the URL as a string. It has to be of type URL. So say URL initialized with the string. And we have to make sure that it's not optional, but since we already have the string in here, we can force unwrap it like this. And then it should be fine. Next, we are going to create a published variable called messages to keep track of the messages we get from the Node.js. And it's basically going to be an array of strings, like so. And the first time the service class gets initialized, we want to do the following. So say init, and then we will reference the default socket by simply saying manager.default socket, and then we can say socket.on client event, so on the connect event. And here we have a callback, which gives us some data and an acknowledgement. And if we get in here, we're basically connected. So we can say connected. And as soon as we connected, we can send a message to our Node.js server. So we simply say socket.emit. Now this event string is basically going to be this right here. So I will just copy this and paste it in here as a string. And here we will pass our message, and I will simply say hi Node.js server. And to receive the message that the Node server sends back to us, we have to say socket on, and then the event is going to be basically what we also defined here. So the iOS client port, and the callback will give us similarly a data and an acknowledgement. Now what the data basically is an array, and the first element of the array is going to be this dictionary. And to access it, we have to do the following. We will say if let data equal to data at the first location. So in the array, the first element, and we want to be able to cast it as a dictionary, like so. So the key is of type string and the value is of type string. And to actually get the raw message, we will check if the data dictionary contains a key called message, because that's basically the key that we are sending to the client, right? So once we have this raw message, we can say self.messages.append, and then we just simply append the raw message. Now, since this will update the messages, and the messages we will use in the SwiftUI view, we have to make sure this whole thing happens in the main queue. So we will say dispatch queue.main.async and simply pass this in here, like so. And since we are accessing self, it's good practice to have a weak reference to it. So we will say weak self and add a question mark in here, like so. And now we can print out the messages. And the way we are going to do that is we go into the content view, and we will replace this with a vertical stack. In here, we will first have some text to indicate what we are getting here. So it's going to be the received messages from Node.js. Let's give it some large font so we can distinguish it. And then we will create a for each. So for each messages, we have to first reference the service class. So we do that in here. Add observed object. It's going to be a variable called service. And now we can reference the array of messages. So we will say for each service.messages, and we identify it by itself, like so. And then in here we get the message, and we will simply just put it into our vstack as a text and give it maybe some padding. And at the end of this, I would also like to have some spacer, like so. All right, now let's run the app and see what we get. But before we do that, let's also get the terminal right here so we can see if it works. All right, now let's run this. All right, so the client is running now, but the server is not really getting anything. And the reason why we don't get the messages is because we forgot one important thing. So we have these handlers for the connect and the specific port, but we never told the socket to connect. So we have to go to the end of the initializer right here and then simply say socket.connect. And now we can try it again. All right, there's one more issue we have to deal with, and that's this transport security thing. So basically, since we're accessing local host, there are some security mechanisms that doesn't allow us that easily to connect to it. And the easiest way to get rid of it is going to the info plist and create a key. And the key is going to be called app transport security settings. Now press this arrow right here, and then we want to add another key to this dictionary. And the first one is going to be allow arbitrary loads, and make sure that this one is set to yes, like so. Let's check if that already helps. So let's save this and run. Oh yeah, it worked. So the client sent a message to the Node.js server, hi Node.js server. You can also see that the connection was successful. And as soon as the server got the message, it sent a message back to the client. And we also received it here on the client side. Nice, so that's all that I wanted to show you in this tutorial. I hope this was helpful for you. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you get notified when new tutorials arrive. And I will see you in the next tutorial.